Good morning, everyone. We will try and cram a lot into what I now hear is the 30 minutes we have, so you'll bear with us. Hopefully, we'll take some questions at the end of this, but the session you're in is breaking down silos in digital investments for the utility industry, a lifecycle approach. My name is Sheif Abade, and I'm the founder of Varuna. We're essentially the one source of truth for water utilities. Fortunately, they don't show up at these events as much. But the idea here is the experts on this panel will share what they're doing to break down what are silos, in some cases physical silos, and I'll start with some context here. About 16 years ago, I was an operations analyst for a combined cycle gas turbine in the UK. And if we had any problems on the plant, you had to physically walk between the control room to the office to the technicians' essentially workroom, and the silos were physical buildings. We could email, but you had to really communicate through what, for the most part, was walls between the teams. And the idea here is we now have technology that allows us to do things a lot more efficiently as an industry. And we have the experts here to share more of their strategies and approaches to doing that now. We'll start with Khalil and a short bio, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. My name is Khalil Shalaby. I'm the Executive Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Transformation. It's a new job at LCRA. LCRA is a G&T utility headquartered here in Austin. We're, I think, the second largest transmission owner. We manage the waterway here. We have 8 dams all up and down the Colorado River. And we also have, I think, north of 3,000 megawatts of generation that we operate on behalf of our customers. Our customers are all wholesale customers, co-ops, and different cities throughout Texas. Prior to that, I worked at Austin Energy, really in the strategy, technology space, also in the market. I had a market group, and we heard about ERCOT just before now. And I agree with a lot of what the speaker said there about ERCOT. So when it comes to technology, I think that market allows a synergy that's hard to replicate in other types of markets that we have here in the United States.
Thanks, Khalil.
Hi, Jason Ketchum with One Gas. One Gas is a natural gas utility with 2.2 million customers across Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. My most recent role is I'm the Vice President of Commercial Activity, which includes all growth and strategic planning. Primary job for our team is really creating business options for the company for now and in the future, which really kind of flows into this topic that we're talking about today. In the industry, I've been in the industry for almost 20 years, started out with weather derivatives, helped start that business as well as the industry, Bluetooth as a technical evangelist when it was a startup, and then investor relations officer for 2 publicly traded energy companies, as well as led a Utility of the Future initiative about 7 years ago.
Thanks.
My name's Leif Erickson. I'm with Aviva. Aviva is an industrial software company that provides software across the full spectrum of an asset lifecycle, from design and build to operate and maintain. I'm head of industry strategy, so what does that mean? That means that I'm responsible, my team's responsible for defining our strategy for the different industries that we go into. I've spent actually 34 years in applying and using digital technology in the industrial space, as a user, as an analyst, and as a vendor. I actually get a kick about some of the hype that we see around things like the Internet of Things or the industrial Internet of Things, because we actually had sensors, digital technology controlling plants 34 years ago. But a lot has changed, and we'll talk about what's changed today.
Yes, and thanks for that, Leif. I think on the prep call, that sort of came up. Yes, there's a bunch of technology coming into the industry, but for the most part, yes, we've had the technology, but the difference now, I'd suggest, and this sort of leads to the first question, is what we can now do with the information we get from some of those devices, how we can link the technologies to help create greater value for our entities. So before we dive into some of those, what are the technologies you're seeing in your businesses that essentially you believe will cause the most transformation as we move into the future of this industry?
You want me to start?
Please.
So I think the most transformative technologies today are cloud and AI, machine learning, as well as an explosion in sensor technology, the driving down the cost, the ability to connect wireless sensors to do a lot of different things. I remember years ago, if you wanted to monitor vibration on a piece of rotating equipment, you had to spend a lot of money to wire up sensors. That's not the case today. You can get wireless vibration sensors that will enable that. The cloud is significant because it means that we can now take that data that formerly sat in those silos and share it more widely, not just with our business partners, but even internally. What I found over the years, and when I was in the analyst business not that long ago, is you can talk to companies, large global companies that have operations around the world, and one of their challenges was just sharing data internally. And what they were looking to do, and it started to do, was to push data up into the cloud to enable that. And finally, machine learning and AI, or advanced analytics, whatever you want to call it, means that we can start to capture and digitize knowledge, as well as extract more meaning out of the data that we have. And the ultimate goal, of course, is to get that perfectly transparent and perfectly predictable operation. And that's, we're not far off from that today.
I would just add to that the amount of data we have now has far outstripped, at least from in the utility world, our capacity to make good use of it, right? Things haven't changed much in that if you have data, maybe you don't want to share it, or maybe you don't even know how to share it. Ownership is a big issue. Am I even allowed to share this data, even internally with certain groups? So I think having the organizational model, the culture, and the processes around controlling data, how do you share the data, how do you organize the data, all that, I think, it's sort of the blocking and tackling that you need that we haven't developed at priority. And maybe we had an excuse because that data was all siloed to begin with and hard to share. Now it's easy to share. But that's where I think utilities can have the most impact, is to develop those processes. And I do think you need a centralized sort of technology group from a process perspective within a utility to organize these processes. If you allow, for example, IT to control the data, or you just tell them, share the data, come up with a data warehouse, that's almost an impossible task for what at most utilities is a very stressed organization. You need a centralized, and there's words for that. It could be an enterprise architecture practice. You can have a chief technology officer that's separate from the IT group and other sort of OT technology groups. But you do need that centralized authority to start to build those processes and to sort of monetize that culture of sharing data across internal organizations and also externally. Especially at municipal utilities, public utilities, a lot of this data, people want it. People want to share it. If you're at an IOU, you may have more purview to keep that data internally. You don't have that purview, so it's even more of an imperative if you're a public utility to have that organization so you can safely share the right data in public.
Jason, just to tie those two points they made together, would you say the technologies you're seeing impacting the gas side of things are sort of the same? And any internal approaches or structures you're using to address the onslaught, for lack of a better word, of the...
Yeah, I mean, to directly answer your question, they are. I don't think I'm going to be able to say any technology that the people in this room probably don't know about and haven't thought about. I think, honestly, it's not about the technology. Technology is not the hard part. We've got a lot of people out there that can help us figure that out, a lot of good consultants. The hard part's the cultural part, the internal part, the breaking down the silos, the people. And how do you channel the right energy in the right directions? And I know in a little bit we'll talk some about kind of innovation governance, but that's something that I'm really passionate about. I've been around technology, been a part of a tech company. I'm an early adopter on about everything. I'm already trying to pick out my robot to put my brain into, but unless we can figure out the people side of things, the rest of the technology is very, very hard. You get the people moving in the right direction, you break down those silos, and you figure out your priorities, it gets real simple then.
So he's talked about I guess you could share a little bit more about the organizational structure you've experienced or you're working on to help address the silo problem.
No, I mean, what we did at the previous utility I worked at is we set up this centralized technology group, and they had two purviews. One was an enterprise architecture practice, which is more sort of IT focused. But you can't do operational technology now without information technology. It's just the systems are becoming so intertwined that they're almost one and the same. And we found that when we set up a really good enterprise architecture practice, the operational technology folks just gravitated towards it because they saw the benefits as they implemented IT projects. They're like, well, that would work when we do sort of the OT project. So again, that centralized group, and you have to build those processes which are, number one, have to be collaborative. So whoever's in charge of that group, that chief technology officer, if you want to call it that, has to be non-threatening, collaborative, have the ability to bring people together. But at the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision.
I'm sorry, quick one. Would that person sort of be from one of those two teams currently, or?
No, it would have to be its own separate team. Okay. It would have to have
the leader.
Yeah. It definitely has to be separate from IT. It's really hard for IT to say no, right? Because they have the resources, and what happens with operational groups, they don't trust that no. They say, you don't want to do it because you don't want to do it for me, or whatever the case may be. You need sort of a centralized group that has other reasons other than I don't have enough resources to say no. For example, we already have other tools. I don't know. Maybe we can do like a raise of hands. If you're in an organization, how many business analytic tools do you own in-house? I used to joke that we owned every single one, right? But nobody actually used every single one. So, and that's a simple tool, right? Business analytic tools, they're pervasive, they're all over. But for some reason, every operational group gravitated to a separate one, and they had to implement that one. And going back to cloud technologies, I think it's a double-edged sword, right? It's become much easier to implement technology, but it's easier for both IT and non-IT groups to implement technology. So a lot of times you find out a group that has no experience in technology signing a contract, kind of going rogue, right? Where's that data going? Do they have a good contract when it comes to that data? On the other end where the data is, when the contract ends, what happens to it? Do you have, contractual comfort in that data would be destroyed at the end of the day, right? So again, you need that centralized group, and there needs to be a lot of trust, and that comes from culture, and that person is sort of a special person that can manage that group, because you really have to have that demeanor where you can bring people together, but at the end of the day, you're trusted to make a decision.
So you touched on innovation governance. Can you speak a little bit more about that and the culture issue?
Sure. And it relates a lot to what Khalil is speaking to as well, is really kind of how do you align the resources to do this. It does start with culture. One of our, things that we like to say at the company to really spark the change and innovation is it's never no, it's just not right now, and what could change to make this a possibility. And so what I said before was our job is to help the company create options for the future, for now and the future. And so my team, rather than, and I've done this before, I've run a centralized strategic planning group, I've run a centralized business development group. What I found is if we can empower more and more of our employees and understand the logic and how simple this actually is, and then give them the tools and the resources to really channel this through, it really creates a lot more options for the business. And so we call that innovation governance. We use a horizon planning approach, so we're looking at near-term current business, then long-term, 5, 10 years out, or it could be also based on how hard that is. But we help the people across the company start with as simple as if the customer has a problem, if there's a solution, you can grow from that. And so we try to make this not so complicated and doesn't feel like rocket science. And a lot of times when we talk about innovation, it can get bogged down in ideas and creativity. The other thing is that we're going to innovate with a purpose, not just innovate to innovate. I've had people across my career, because they know I'm passionate about this, come to me and say, we just need to innovate. And I say, but why or in what way? So don't just innovate without a purpose. So once you nail down what that purpose can be, you start having people flow in the right direction. We have an internal process where we can gather ideas from across the company. We start out with what we call an opportunity brief. It's like a baseball card is the way I think of it. You've got kind of your front and your back, and you can quickly prioritize all the various ideas that are coming in and decide which ones are going to move kind of through the pipeline. The next stage from that is what we call a design sprint. Many of you have probably heard of that before. It's more of a kind of a design thinking methodology to help flesh that out in a matter of 5 days and get to a final decision if you're going to move forward now or if you're going to put it on pause. And then once it comes out of that, it can get into full business case. The other thing that's scary to a lot of employees about innovation is you have a great idea, you go tell someone about it, and they say, well, the easiest one is no, or build a business case. And not many people are qualified to do that kind of work. And so that's another thing my team does is help teach and provide the tools so that we can coach and get people through this so we can get a lot more ideas around this process. This all comes together with a centralized group that is providing the tools, the training, the coaching, the encouragement, as well as coordinating the prioritization process to help us drive through it with the development on the items that we choose.
Great. I can imagine you have a ton to share about it.
I think the thing that I would say is that we can't forget that digital transformation is disruptive, right? And so what that means for your organization is that means change. And change is scary for people, right? Because that means insecurity. And that's what happens in most organizations is different parts of the organization circle the wagons around their silo. They try to, they come in, they don't open up. And so for that reason, I think everything that you've heard is fantastic, but it has to be driven from the top. There has to be CEO, there's got to be a vision at the top, there's got to be commitment at the top to say we are going to do this. Because if you don't have that, you're going to get that sort of siloed mentality, and everybody's going to be trying to prepare themselves for that change and protect themselves when the change comes, and nothing happens then.
Yeah. So one thing because as I mentioned, we work with water folk. One thing we sort of suggest is to start with a process that's already broken, because someone wants change to happen there anyway. Why don't we use that as essentially a test case that will attract all those folk who are innovative, interested in seeing things change, and the worst case scenario there is nothing gets fixed, but they would have tried anyway. And the culture of failure that is required when you start to experiment with things like this and innovate is quite necessary as well. The next question here is, who are the stakeholders you absolutely have to get involved to make these, to break down these silos, but also make the change happen? Because culture and along a system is the hardest thing to change. You can have all the technology in the world, but culturally, who are the people within the organization that you need to bring along to get the groups working together, essentially? Well,
I would say everybody, but I'll let these gentlemen talk about it as related to their organization. And that's, again, it has to come from the top, but there's got to be widespread buy-in to where the organization's going. So.
I think if you can get the buy-in of the leaders of each of the business units that you have internally, and you can truly make them evangelists for your process and your culture, you don't have to work too hard sort of down the line. Because if they see their own leadership buying into your cultural model, and that's one way that I found success with that model, is I really try to partner with those leaders and have them sort of evangelize the culture and the process model down the line. I would say that one thing you have to do is start delivering some sort of easy wins, right? I mean, you can't say no to everything. You can't have a big sausage maker that every time somebody wants something from you, when it comes to technology, they have to, do the business case. And I agree with you, not everybody's qualified to do it. If it's under a certain threshold, and there's a lot of work that's underneath a certain threshold, just either let them do it with some sort of controls or do it for them. And once you start doing that, these groups, they don't see whether it's a big job or a little job. They just see that you did something for them, and you delivered technology for them, and you made their life easier. Once you start delivering those easier wins, the more important work, then you can sort of put through those rigorous processes that you need to put through.
Any particular examples of the little wins?
Well, there's a lot of internal business tools that now are cloud-based that you can implement very, very quickly, whether it's internal Skype or whatever it is, right? I'm just an example. I'm not advocating for it, but but there are some really easy wins you can put through. Putting together some sort of IT tiger team that can mobilize quickly to do those easy wins for you, so that it doesn't get bogged down within your internal processes. That's important too, and maybe having a dedicated project manager just for that tiger team. But those folks can still do their regular jobs day to day. But I found that sort of customer service, internal customer service is really valuable. And also having dedicated sort of business relationship managers. IT has become so big within companies that it exceeds 10 to 15% of the internal O&M budget. It's no longer, just that internal machine is a really big pot of money. So you can afford to spend some dollars on having internal customer service and having dedicated people that really understand the business that you're serving. And just having those kind of liaisons that really understand the business and can come back to the technology group and say, this is what these folks really need, I think is very valuable as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's everyone and start at the top. To me, it's a lot about pace. You've got to communicate, obviously. You've got to be clear about how you're going to move things forward and why it's important to them. And what problem are you trying to solve? Kind of like, I like your idea of start with something that's already broken. Yeah. Start with some of those kind of things, which can get you into the easy wins. And then when things do start moving, make sure you're executing very, very, very well, or you'll lose credibility, extremely fast. So I'm very fortunate. I have a senior leadership team who is all on board on this. We have talking points that all the vice presidents and above have across the organization to talk about these at employee meetings. We have a way to get more and more of our employees involved. In the terms of pace, the important thing with that is you don't want to leave a bunch of people behind. I like to move really fast. I can tend to be a little bit impatient, but I guess that's one of the things I've learned across my career is there's a lot of really good people, and they're not going to change at the pace I am. They're not going to adopt new ideas the pace that I am, but don't leave them behind. Give them an option and give them a way to get involved, and it'll go a lot more smooth.
So I'll go a little bit off script because there's we talk about getting leadership to trickle it down. When we ask of the employees to do the work of breaking down the silos, innovating, and we don't tie it to, because I've had conversations with utilities where the leadership says we should do this, but the folk who do the work day to day are still being measured against deliverables that have nothing to do with the innovation agenda that you have. Any thoughts about this? Because I still had a conversation with someone about this just yesterday. So.
Yeah, I don't know that there's an easy answer to that, to be honest with you. It is a challenge that but again, I think it comes down to if there's a very clear vision, then that should translate down into the right metrics ultimately. Doesn't always, of course, and that's what happens.
Yeah. Jason?
I'd say a couple things. One is money. You know, can it make the company or save the company money? You know, sounds like a really easy one, but that a lot of times is a good place to start. I also, you know, work for an IOU or an investor-owned utility, so shareholders are always a concern of ours. But even if you're a municipal, cooperative, you know, public entity, you still want to save customers money at the same time. So, you know, I think a lot of it's going to start with money, just to be candid. And then also, as I brought up before, innovation with purpose. I would be so frustrated if I was one of those people where I had a CEO and a leadership team come out and say, hey, be different, innovate, be creative, and then they never say why. And honestly, I see that. Not at my company, thankfully, but you know, I go to enough conferences and I see enough speeches. I kind of feel like that's the message, and so that's really it. I mean, figure out, you know, how you can make the company some money, and figure out what the purpose is. What's that problem that you're trying to solve, you know, for? And that starts with the very first part of the strategic planning process, all the way down to it can be a specific customer technology. What problem are you trying to solve, and go after that, and don't overcomplicate this, but give people that purpose and that why. Otherwise, it's going to be really frustrating for them.
That's an interesting point, because I don't know how many times I hear, and again, in my former life as an analyst, you know, one of our customers would set up an inquiry call and say, CEO says we have to do digital transformation. We got to do it quickly. Well, so what does he mean or she mean by that, right? What is it? Well, no, we just have to do it, and so you figure it out. So again, it comes down to, hopefully they understand that at the top. You know, what does it mean for your business? If that's not there, you're going to be challenged for sure.
Khalil, thoughts?
I mean, I wouldn't take such a, I mean, some vagueness sometimes is okay, because sometimes we just don't know what's even out there. So you can have, you know, a very purposeful vision that ties to purposeful goals, and then they come up with purposeful initiatives, and it's all sort of tied together. But then if you don't sort of have the cultural openness for technologies you don't know about, for processes you don't know about, so it's you know, I think you need to have both. You don't want everybody kind of running around trying to do digital transformation, don't know what that really means, right? But do you have the cultural openness to accept technologies and the processes to evaluate it quickly and say, this is really an idea that can add value, and this is a technology that can add value. I mean, as an example, the other day we're struggling with technology we can give our field workforce so that, you know, on their tablets or on their phone, they have almost everything when it comes to internal applications back in the office, right? It's right there, right? And, you know, I was at a conference where I saw a tool that in itself is a platform that integrates all that in one. So we had never thought of that, right? So, you know, we're going to meet with them. May not be the tool for us, but do you have sort of that cultural openness for new ideas? Because we were headed on a path of point solutions that you would integrate, you know, sort of at that point in the field, and that's really complicated to do. Yeah. So maybe this is an easy solution for us, but, you know, with that, do you have the internal processes to really evaluate that technology and what it's going to bring to bear to you? So again, I think it's both there. It's both.
Just to respond,
please, yes.
And that I mentioned earlier, because I agree with Khalil, you also have to have room to experiment, make mistakes. If you're, you know, that's what we use the Horizon planning framework to do that. So Horizon 1 is really our core business. It's that day-to-day work. It's that utility business. Horizon 2 are those kind of building viable business options. Horizon 3 is kind of evaluating the future. And so for my team, we break it up. You know, 70% of my team of 110 people is on Horizon 1, 20% is on Horizon 2, and 10%, so about 11 people are on Horizon 3. In Horizon 3, our success rate is probably about 1 in 30 of things that are going to kind of swing around and things that we evaluate is really the expectation. But it's really that governance process is really how do we drive those forward and demonstrate ways to do that. So I do agree with that. And it's really up to the company. I work for a 100% regulated natural gas utility. I'm pretty happy at 70-20-10. If I'm a pharmaceutical company, I'm probably going to flip that at the least. So that 70-20-10 is really, you can use that framework, but that can really be kind of how you judge how fast you want to drive innovation, as well as what, you know, kind of your specific business and climate is at the same time.
That's great. We have some time for some questions. I'll open it up to the audience. I'm sure there's a burning question out there. None. In the meantime, we still have questions I can ask. You talked about who's allowed to have access to what data and essentially the security internally of what information people should have. Because transparency is required to move forward with any of these things at a level that I don't think our industry has been comfortable with for the most part. Any thoughts on how that's been addressed now?
I think it depends on the industry, as Jason pointed out, and it depends on the kind of data, right? So there's certain data that's regulated, certainly HR data about customers, you've got to be careful with that. But data about your operations, your machine, I think you need to, or should, err on the side of sharing the data more widely. Because that will increase the odds that someone will see something that your experts don't see that will mitigate some risk, improve performance, et cetera. I think about, again, having spent my career in the industrial sector, the first 15 years in the oil and gas, where there's a lot of risk there. And if you think about any significant incident that has happened in the industry over the years, if the right data was exposed to the right people, or more widely, if you will, across the organization and with your business partners, it probably wouldn't have happened. So on that side, I would say err on the side of exposing it, but obviously where there are restrictions or regulations, you have to be careful there.
Yeah, I think we have a question back there.
Hi, good morning. Jared Hugh from Data Design. You, Jason, mentioned a little bit of design thinking in your process. I was wondering how, or if you include user research, ethnographic research as part of that, and if you could expand on that.
Yeah, we do. We don't always do the full 5-day sprint. We modify that some, which I know you're not supposed to, but I think there's some license to be creative there. But we do almost any sprint that we do, we start with really kind of some market research, expertise, really understanding what that is. A lot of times we'll call different experts and set up times where they can call into the meeting ahead of time. Versus having to invite them, all to these things. And we've been able to, either, consultants that we know, technology companies, peers, competitors, whatever it is. And the interesting thing is people are usually, maybe design sprints are still novel enough, they want to participate, and we get a lot of good feedback that way. And we do, no matter what the type of sprint it is, we do come back the other end and do a customer test. We actually used a design sprint first to basically do our strategic planning process this year, and our customer group was the senior leadership team. So it was kind of a different way of using. Usually design sprints are meant more product-based, but we found that it has a lot more applications to take a problem statement and to not spend the next 6 months to 12 months once a week on a call with a special project team, but take those people, give them 3 to 5 days, and have them come out of there with a solution. It's, to me, very attractive, and it's worked well.
That's great. I think we almost out of time. Final words on what not to do.
I'll let it start down there. I have to think about that one for a minute.
Oof, tough question, Shay. What not to do? I'll go back to data. I think we started there, right? That's where we started with data. I'll give you an example of just how dicey sharing data is. Yes. I was at the doctor's office. I was at the waiting room, and when you go in, you sign in your name and your date of birth, right? So I can see everybody's name and everybody's date of birth. I could have taken a picture of that, and I go to the reception lady, and I'm like, "But isn't that HIPAA data? She's like, no, we take real good care of it. We store that data really well." I'm like, yeah, but I'm not supposed to see it. So, sharing data in that office was like right there. You haven't even walked in yet, and you're already, sort of exposing. Right. So, within a typical energy company, I think there's 3 classes of data. There's your customer data, there's PII, there's employee data, right? And then there's reliability type security data when it comes to your operating systems. And I think everybody needs to know what can be shared and where, and you have to give the employees a break. If you don't have the right governance model, they're just going to get tripped up, just like at that doctor's office themselves. You have to have those governance models, and it has to be collaborative. I think these governance or data groups have to be collaborative from across the organization so they all understand the whys and the whats of what data can be shared where and how.
Great. Thank you. Jason?
Yeah, I'd just say, know what problem you're trying to solve is the key. It's for me, I know in the past it's very easy to get overly distracted by technology. It's very shiny, very bright, very fun. But make sure you stay true to the problem that you're trying to solve, and remember that, technology is just another tool to solve a problem. But there's also other tools, including, other processes, how people think, different things like that. Thank you.
And I'm going to build on what Jason said, which is we get excited about shiny objects, right? So I mentioned machine learning and AI, and we want to gravitate towards that stuff. It's the cool stuff. It's the stuff that we think is going to solve world hunger for us. In reality, the simplest things. So what I'm saying is, what not to do is to chase after that before you do the basics, right? And the basics is getting data and making it more visible, sharing it, putting more context around it. It's fairly basic. The technology's there. But a lot of organizations don't have that capability today. And so, focus on that part first and then go to the next level.
Help me thank the panelists, please.